We know, history tells us, that slavery was officially abolished on August 1st, 1834. And yet, the average Jamaican, the average Jamaican who descend from slaves, African Jamaicans, are still living in abject poverty or some form of poverty. Recent statistics show that Jamaicans are surviving on approximately $6.85 per day. And yet, despite having gone through slavery, apprenticeship, independence, in many ways, Jamaicans have the reputation in some quarters of Jamaica as being worthless, lazy. I think something like 80% of Jamaicans are officially designated as quote unquote squatters. Why are so many of us still poor? Why are so many of us still landless? Why are so many of us still going hungry, homeless in the streets? How is it that those of us whose foreparents were on this plantation for 500 years, who were dragged here, we didn't go and get visas to come here like some of the 21 most wealthy and powerful families? How is it that they have the reputation of being businessmen, smart men, bankers, great entrepreneurs, leaders of industry? Didn't my people before me slave for this country? According to Bob, the question is still relevant. So let's discuss this tonight. Let's discuss how we found ourselves in this current state. What is our current state? Pick it off with an analogy that a friend shared with me many years ago. You know, when you have a dog, a bad dog, or other animal that tends to bite, that you have to chain up. But let's use a dog for this example. A bad pit bull or a bad Rottweiler. And you bring him home and you chain him up and you take time soften him up. You get him used to his surroundings. You pet him. You feed him nice food. You give him some shots. You probably buy a nice little cushion for him bed. The only time you are able to remove those chains from that dog is once he is tamed. Chains were never removed from us until they were certain that we were a slave. The chains were removed from us the minute slavery began. That's when true slavery began, because they didn't need the slave chains anymore. That's why they had that period of apprenticeship to train you into slavery. So let's discuss it. Let's talk about it. Let's go back in history. Let's re examine. Let's look at what's happening today. Let's make the connections. Welcome to all my guests. Welcome to the listeners. Kasani, Empress, I see you. What do you have for us this evening?
Boy, I'm just here to, listen and to drop in my gems. Every year around this time, I always say, you know, I don't celebrate any independence or emancipation because when you look at the history of it, there was no transfer of power. It was just words, words and signed documents, the so called independence. So I agree with what you're saying. I'm just interested to hear, everybody else's take on it.
Give thanks, Kasani. Brother Leighton, how are you this evening?
I'm doing well, Kishi. Hi, Kasani and Michelle. I think I want to start off the discussion by talking about the great work by Eric Williams, Capitalism and Slavery, where he showed conclusively and beyond a shadow of a doubt that emancipation was a direct result and consequence of capitalism. That it was no um, altruism or generosity on behalf of the former slave owners that resulted in our quote unquote emancipation, but that it was a direct result of their no longer wanting to have slaves as an expense on their books. It had become unprofitable. They needed a way to still have black people as the bedrock of their economy without having to treat them as, for all intents and purposes, as their children and slaves. So the whole idea was to give them freedom, nominal freedom, so that they had to fend for themselves. In the meantime, creating circumstances where they had no choice but to still offer their virtually free labor. So I think that is the point of departure, that emancipation was not to free the slaves from a condition of slavery, but to free the owners from a position of financial disadvantage.
And what better evidence do we have of that than the monetary compensation that was given to the planters upon abolishment? I believe it was £20,000 for each planter. I mean, £20,000 in 20 million. What am I saying? £20 million in 1830s. That's what each planter received as compensation for his loss of workforce. I see Kasani reminding us that payments are still being made, even in the 2000s. Most recently in 2015, you know, apprenticeship as well. In addition, not only did they receive monetary compensation, they also got a period of free labor. Because many of us may not remember, in the letter written by the governor of Jamaica in 1835, where he explains what the system of apprenticeship will be, they still had to give 45 hours per week of free labor. And in that letter, the governor warns that the period of apprenticeship will be extended if you were deemed to be behaving poorly. I think something like field slaves, the period was 6 years, and house slaves and skilled slaves, artisan slaves, was 4 years. And within that letter, there was a warning. Should you try to escape, you will be caught by the Maroons or the police. Honey, talk to us, Queen.
Wow, that's interesting. I didn't know that part of the letter. They would be caught by the Maroons or the police. That's I did not know. But what I do feel, what I do believe is that it was a new system. I think we're currently experiencing that right now. And this is the relevance of history, is to see how we can look at patterns and know when we're going to be experiencing it again. And what happened, they were just changing the financial system, and they called it emancipation and independence. And we are experiencing that right now, where there is a change in the way the monetary systems work. And each time there's a change, there are winners and losers, and that is what happened then. So I listen to you say how slaves feel slaves. What's different today? We have the same thing. I feel we're still working under the same um, conditions that were created then, but they're now gonna change to something looking more of like a social credit system. It will be less about your race and where you're from, but more about your social compliance. So I think it all goes back to, yeah, the one world religion. People are waiting for it. You don't need to wait for it. It's already here. It's capitalism, and we're all a part of it, myself included. So yeah, those are my thoughts on that.
Thank you, Kasani. Leighton, this system of capitalism that Eric Williams so profoundly wrote about in his book, which he later banned, by the way, in true house slave fashion. But I digress. Why is it so important in telling the history of the abolishment to paint it as though it was the work of these great men like Wilberforce and the kind hearted people of England who was opposed to the moral degradation being seen on the plantation? Why is it so important to rob or further distort history in this way?
Well, it's it was extremely important from a psychological perspective to have the slaves be grateful and perpetually indebted to their masters for granting them their freedom. When you spoke in your introduction about taming the slaves, and you'll notice that I use the word slaves. I'm not um, in favor of this talking about the enslaved peoples, because um, in many ways the people look at themselves as slaves rather than as enslaved peoples. Uh, that is to say, there is a lot of shame and blame that we attach to ourselves and our foreparents. That's the ones that sold us into slavery. There's more blame and shame attached to those actors than the actual enslavers. So it's a two pronged thing. One, to make us feel grateful, and two, to make us feel inadequate, as though we may not always be the best custodians of our own freedom. Uh, so this is the reason that it was so important for us to have the notion that we were generously granted our freedom by the British. Uh, the Sam Sharp Christmas Rebellion of 18, when was it? Was it 1830? But it was close to the time when all the abolition talk was going on, and the real impetus for that revolt was that um, the king had granted freedom, and the wicked planters in Jamaica were not granting it. So even from that perspective, you see a thinking among the slave population that their entitlement to freedom wasn't based on any um, primary moral imperative, that, enslavement is wrong and freedom is a right. The right of freedom depended on the monarch. It had been granted by the monarch, and the wicked planters were denying the slaves the king's largesse. So, right then and there, you see from the beginning that our emancipation was really something at the behest of the British. And that is something that has doomed the whole quote unquote emancipation project. I firmly believe that if you if if your freedom is granted by any source, that your freedom is circumscribed by that source itself, because you can't use your freedom for any purpose for which they did not grant it, because it really is freedom at their whim and fancy. So our whole emancipation celebrations, as far as I'm concerned, are a total waste of time, shambolic mockery joke.
Thank you, Leighton. Sam Sharp's rebellion was in 1831. And, I agree with what you said. And just to add to what you said about the psychological impact of declaring that someone has given you your freedom, a thing that can never be given by an outside source. We're all born free. It further cements in the mind of the enslaved that this person is superior and godlike. This person can have such a great power over my life that they can determine whether I move or stand. And also, it waters down, it dilutes the history and the fight of people like Sam Sharp and the brave men and women who were in constant struggle from the minute they stepped off the ships onto these shores. They are who we have to thank for the ending of official slavery, so to speak, not the King of England. But Kasani, I wanted to ask you because you mentioned in one of your comments this idea of house slave versus field slaves and the fact that not much has changed since then. You can expand on that for us, please?
Sure. So, at the risk of this affecting me professionally, I will say it. I live and work in Montego Bay, right? And I work in the tourist industry. I worked for a very well known property for a number of years, luxury, high end property. And I remember once, and I'm just giving an example of what happens all over, right, this country. So we have wealthy people from developed, put developed in quotations, developed countries coming here for vacation. And it's because of this financial model of third world country and developed that they can afford to come here several times a year. Meanwhile, some of the people that are serving them are on minimum wages. So that's the background. So we have that. And I remember after maybe about 5 years of working there, they had a rule that all of a sudden all staff had to use a separate gate, or we had to go through a metal detector. We had to have security search our bags. And then, for most people, large property, hundreds of acres. So for a lot of people to get to their workstation, It's a good walk. 8 minutes to walk to get to work after you get where you are, mean because the taxi can't come onto the property. So you go through all of that search and then you find your way if there's a shuttle there or a buggy. If not, if you're late, you have to get to where you're going. And I remember just not feeling great. I was on vacation when I came back. And I noticed that my white friends or Caucasian counterparts were not subject to this rule, even though they're the same category of workers that myself and some of us were. They were allowed to drive through the gate as normal, unsearched. I won't get into what I did. It was a huge thing because I refused. I refused. I said, whatever special permission they're going to be given, I would like that for myself. So that happened. But here's the house slave and the whatever mentality. You know who was most mad with me for insisting that I'm not going to go to the gate and be searched? My fellow Jamaicans. They're upset with me. What does she? She go on like she nice, better than everybody else. What I would have wanted is some solidarity for them to join me in saying like, listen, what's all this special treatment that is going on in our country? And this is just one example. But that mentality that was created, perhaps on the slave plantations or even before, where there's some sort of hierarchy. Because, a slave is a slave. So it's laughable to say, well, you are a better slave, you have little more freedom, and you have little less freedom. So it's just the same divide and conquer mentality, so that everybody doesn't come together and call out the foolishness for what it is. You're giving people categories. And then when one lone wolf, because this is how I felt, like one outlier comes out, then you look like a troublemaker. And they will tell you to your face that, I was told, Kasani, everybody else is fine. You're the only one that's having a problem with this. So that's what I mean. And this exists not just in the hotel and tourist industry. It exists all over. I love what you said, the idea that we were being granted freedom, and the psychological effect of that. It's like basically agreeing to the fact that, oh, you don't have any freedom and you have to be granted it, obviously by somebody that is in a higher position than you. And so the celebration itself, right, is that it's kind of like stamping that as being what's the word, rubber stamping that as being, yes, like you're agreeing to that foolishness, and it continues. And the reason why I say capitalism is the religion is because a lot of people, if you were to even bring situations like this to their attention, it would be, well, yeah, we need the money, we have bills, we have these bills to pay, so we really can get into that part of it. Yeah.
So true. Leighton, solidarity among blacks, among the slaves, among the enslaved. Uh, you know, the Maroons. The Maroons will tell you boastfully of their prowess as warriors and how they gallantly fought off the British. But we mustn't let them forget that at some point they exchanged their freedom for ours. And they were complicit in returning us to the plantation, in strengthening the powers of the planters. And maybe you couldn't call them house slaves, but certainly they acted like them. Is that a fair criticism of the Maroons, Leighton?
Uh, it certainly is, and it's one of the more vexed aspects of the whole divide and conquer ethos that is so effective in keeping the slave system intact. Uh, because there is an argument on behalf of the Maroons that it was necessary for them to protect their hard-won freedom from, uh, the danger of infiltration and information that might be taken to the authorities by runaway slaves who knew of their hideouts and movements and so forth. Um, but at the end of the day, we can't get away from the point that you've made that they really did exchange their security, or the security of the runaway slaves, for their own. And that is something that we have to come to terms with and accept.
But before you mute, Leighton, I think of the example that Kasani gave as the outlier, as she put it, and the very fact that for many freedom fighters, one of the main obstacles they have to face is the slave standing in between them and protecting massa. And I think there is a quote that says, "My bullets aren't for my fellow black, but if I have to use them to get to massa, I will. If I have to use them on you to get to massa, I will." Is there any room in war, in rebellion, in maintaining freedom as a slave, to protect that freedom so fiercely that you may have to see yourself returning slaves or executing other slaves like yourself?
Um,
Not suggesting that Kasani should have should have shot any of the the other blacks, but I'm just thinking, if the blacks were
um,
to come out and say, "No, no, Kasani, you're going too bad," what would she have done?
um, I am very sympathetic, and I've had some debates where my position has been, deprecated. But I love the system of necklacing that they use in South Africa, where they would fill tires with gasoline and burn, light the tires around the necks of informers. The truth of the matter is that unless those traitors are removed, there is no prospect of freedom. When you have such a large contingent of buffer Negroes who will join with you in freedom plans, and then once those plans are hatched, go straight to the master and talk about who are the ringleaders and what are the details of the plan. And that basically was the basis on which every slave revolt founded in Jamaica. Always one slave, one or a group of slaves that would go and say, these troublemakers are planning this, these troublemakers are planning that. And I really believe, as much as we want to uh, have some degree of solidarity, you can't have solidarity with people that are not interested in their freedom. And one thing that we have to realize is that the quality of our individual freedom is no greater than the strength of our collective freedom. So, it's like, even for instance, consider the the requirements to vote in Jamaica. I'm not enumerated because you have to be fingerprinted 10 times, 10 fingerprints. in order to be able to vote. I refused to do it. And I remember feeling really upset with my Jamaican people for running en masse to enumerate under such circumstances. I really felt that there would have been, ought to have been, a widespread national protest and not a march on the street protest, just the same way that in the time of COVID, how Jamaicans just en masse quietly sat on their feet and decided not to go and get injected. If we would all just have sat on our asses and decided not to get enumerated and say we are not giving up our 10 fingerprints, but once you don't do it individually and the mass of other people do it, then it becomes almost like you're not doing it carries no weight or no or power. You have to get the others on board. And sadly, because of the capitalist imperative that you should get ahead no matter how far your neighbor is falling behind. You should get ahead even if it means robbing your neighbor or somehow depriving him. It develops such an atomistic way of thinking that people just don't care anymore as to what is happening with the rest of their peers or fellows, so long as they themselves individually can get ahead. And so, this perpetual state of fragmentation, where people who manage to get out from under simply become gatekeepers to prevent others from getting as far as they have gone, means that you have this crab in a barrel syndrome where the mass of the crabs can never escape the barrel.
Thank you, Layden. Kasani, I'm wondering, you both spoke of the religion of capitalism. However, in defense of the Maroons, again, I wonder, it's not so much that they were necessarily trying to get ahead in the system of slavery, but they were trying to, and certainly I think that's what they would say, that to exist within a state of free men on a plantation where there were slaves. And I wonder to what extent is that even feasible, especially when I hear modern day black people say things like, boy, all me want is just a farm. I just want to live off the grid. It seems like we all have this fantasy where we leave the plantation and fly off into the hills and live this eco-friendly fantasy where we just pick banana from the tree, swim in the river. Meanwhile, Massa, I lick people back down at the flat.
Yes.
It seems like a modern day evolution of what the Maroons basically say. We free up here, so. So if you are gonna try come and mash up few thing, we are called police. What's your thoughts on that?
Boy, it's a nuanced conversation, especially when you bring up the Maroons, because there is a school of thought. I don't know for sure. It's certainly interesting. A school of thought that most of people of African descent that are here in Jamaica or that you find in the Caribbean are not from Africa. That we've always been here, and we've always been free and sovereign. And a lot of what we were taught in schools was the rewriting of history in order to keep us mentally enslaved. So there's that thing. But let's imagine that what we were told is true. I can certainly understand why the leadership in the leadership of the Maroons would have taken that action to say, okay, in order to preserve our existence, we'll strike a deal with you, and if slaves run away, they can't come over here, so come hide. We'll send them back to you, right? So, as a point of leadership and governance, right? I get it. But what I think the issue is that what we need to get is, it goes back to the example I gave when I was at the hotel. The thing is, the large majority of us that are here keeping the thing running, if we all came together and said, no, we're not doing this, what choice would they have? And so this idea that it's the same thing. So I can run off and go live off grid by a river and have a soft, slow, easy life, right? While, as you said, the rest of the masses down are being subjugated. It's only a matter of time before they come for me too. So the thing that we have to get is, the way forward is community. The way forward is unity. The way forward is coming together. There is literally nothing that you can't jump through that. There is nothing else that we are going to be able to do, because I feel honestly, and it's not a doom and gloom theory, it's just a point of history, the present, and where we're moving forward. I believe that we are going to experience other things collectively as a species that are going to be tough to deal with, similar to what happened to COVID. Other civilizations before have experienced things like that, where something is happening and it's affecting everybody. The only way that we can survive is to come together and be unified. So no, not me one run off go buy 9 acres and upon a river, and then you over there with your 13 looking after your family. That is the model that society is living in now. I know sometimes my ideas can seem very radical, but like, hear me out. Imagine, right? You live in a gated community. I don't know where you guys live in, like a townhouse or whatever. Me in my little section, looking after me and my family, paying my bills. I don't know what happening downstairs or across the road from me. People them go down and have no food. But it doesn't matter. It's the same thing. You have these hotels, like they cook massive tons of food every day and have a policy to throw it all away, while there are people that are hungry and are starving. That's the capitalist model. There is no way forward until we throw away these ideas and understand that, as a yoga teacher and a breath coach, I can tell you this idea of separation and that we're all different, not no go so. Every single, the baseline of existence is your breath. And if you're not practicing the baseline of existence, it means you're dead and you're not in the conversation. So we are all equal in that, right? And all of these lines of separation, they're going to have to go if we're going to exist optimally. I believe that humanity, we haven't, the fact that we have to work to survive, and the stress that that brings on our nervous system, I'm telling you, humanity alive today, we have no idea how strong we are and what type of powers we have, and we are not functioning optimally, because just that one thing is making our breathing incorrect. Our circadian rhythms are out of whack. We make poor choices. You can see it in how we spend our money and the things we eat and our consumption. And so, we have a lot that's against us, and we have voices like us, and the work that we do. Dacia last week, small voices that are talking about a different way and a new way. But we need to find the others like ourselves, and we need to come together and stop building these little things just for we and the people that we love. We have to come together.
Thanks, Kasani. Leighton, this idea of separation that Kasani mentioned, I'm interested in that aspect in relation to what she said, which a lot of people do say, that it's a myth that the majority of African Jamaicans are from Africa, that we are actually the original Jamaicans. And this idea, you said earlier that you don't like the term enslaved African, and how we seem to want to distance ourselves from slavery, from what happened. And in many ways, some could say that we come up with all kind of alternatives. We were never brought from Africa. We are the original Jamaicans. It's black people sell we into slavery. It's not white people. What are your thoughts on this, and how does this affect our ability to move forward as a community?
Okay. What's that question? Um, firstly, uh, I don't think. All right, the numbers of people who came here, the ships they came here on, the plantations they were sold to, are matters of historical record. They, at the time of emancipation, there was a detailed accounting of the head count of all of the plantation owners across the island.
Because, like
Because
every good businessman, they had to give good accounting of their cargo.
precisely. And I'll tell you this. I don't know if you've ever seen the classified ads that would be put out around during slavery for runaway slaves. This was in America. Fascinating, fascinating, because I always thought that in order to treat humans like cattle, you had to really deny their humanity. You had to look at them as cattle. But when you see the classified ads and the description of the slaves, you realize that they knew these people intimately. Slave, runaway slave girl of 14, slight French accent, able to read and write, and has certain manners as would fit her for a blah blah blah. The detail that they give, so that if you book up this runaway girl, you will put her in custody right away and send for her proper owner. So they really knew us intimately. They knew who we were sold to and why. They have all the records. And it's interesting that, and a lot of those records are very much intact today. You can know which plantation, if you want to dig far enough down your family tree, you can actually, people have found out like which ship their people came down on, which plantation they went to, all of that. So this thing where we want to pretend like a great percentage of us were indigenous. I believe there were Africans here in Jamaica and all over the Greater Antilles that were not brought by slave ships. The great historian Ivan van Sertima uh, shows that very persuasively in his book They Came Before Columbus. But I don't think we can conflate that small truth into a big lie and pretend like we were all free people. Like we know who named Dowie and who named Mackenzie and who named what have you. We get
And
the
what is this obsession with dishonoring the Tainos and the Jamaicans from their birthright? Why do we? Because I see it's amongst Black Americans too. The perspective that Kasani gave, that some people have, and I know she's saying that many people say it, but I often wonder because I hear it too. Why is it like we're never happy just being Africans? Well, I mean, we know why, but goodness.
um Kish, that is an excellent point. And this is where I'm coming to. There are so many African retentions that we have that serve us well. Like, for instance, somebody's building a house in the rural parts and everybody get together 1 or 2 days, build a house. Everybody just take a day off from work, a day off from their garden, their occupation, whatever they're doing, and they just get together and build this person's house. All he does is provide some of the materials and the food. That's it. And a lot of these community initiatives are commercial, commercial, like almost communal commercial concepts, like round robin and so forth. These are African things, and we
And
just take them for
Susu and partner.
exactly. And these things are such an integral part of our community and our and for our benefit. And part of the reason we disrespect our Africanness is because we are not taught and do not appreciate the extent to which these things are part of us, and that and the degree to which we are empowered by them and ought to be proud of them. Perhaps the most, one of the most over quoted and underappreciated lyrics is emancipate yourself from mental slavery. None but ourselves can free our mind. Because there are things that we have, like if, for instance, we have the most developed high school athletics championships in the whole world, like in the whole world, the richest history, the most well developed, the most storied, the most beautiful. Left to us alone, we would criticize ourselves for uh, placing an undue emphasis on athletics, and in myriad of ways we could curse and berate ourselves for that. But let a white person from Germany, Italy, anywhere come and study it and do a big document, we would feel so proud. We would feel so vindicated. And this inability to look at anything that we have created and find utility, joy, pleasure, and pride in it completely outside of what any set of quote unquote developed group of white people think. That is our biggest hindrance to any kind of emancipation.
You know that quote from Bob Marley's song, Emancipate Yourself from Mental Slavery. None but ourselves can free our minds. A lot of people don't know that's not Bob Marley's words. He was making a direct quote from the Honorable Marcus Garvey. I want to talk about the letter that was published by the governor of Jamaica in the 1800s, and where he describes how you can shorten your apprenticeship or not get punished during apprenticeship is by good behavior. And obviously, we know what good behavior is: obedience to your master, humble yourself, work the free days that you are asked to work, do as you're told. Basically be a slave until I decide you're no longer useful as a slave. And I look at how this has evolved today. Yes, thank you, Kasani, perfect word. Is a level of compliance with capitalism and anti-black racism. So how do you speak? Do you speak the King's English or do you speak patois? It will determine how you're treated, the opportunities you get, how you're harassed by the police then and now, how much you assimilate to the idea of the white power structure and that whiteness is to be revered. Whether you accept the religion of your master or you are at a Pocomania church, you're a Rasta, whatever it is, it exists to this very day. And that's part of, we see that too in the slavery, the house slave, field slave thing, where you don't need the police anymore because the people who think that they have greater assimilated to the plantation system, they are going to report you. They are going to minimize you. They are going to lock you out of the jobs, lock you out of school because you look too black, talk too black, dress too black. What are your thoughts on this, Kasani?
Yeah. Repeat that last part for me, please.
No, I'm saying that even today,
Mm-hmm.
the demarcation between house slave and field slave is often down to how much you can assimilate to
Right.
whiteness.
Definitely. I agree. It's there. I remember during COVID, when people were told to stay in their homes and to not have strangers in your home and to not entertain. We experienced it happened in Jamaica and all over the world where your neighbors were calling and telling on you because they were behaving and they were complying with all the rules. And so everybody now turns into a police to just call out the people that are not complying. And what I said earlier about that system of slavery was a model that was imposed on a set of people by another set of people. But what we have now, or what's developing, is that it's not a race thing anymore. It's for everybody, right? It's coming to everybody, but it's the same system, same master, same ruler, same agenda. It never stopped. It's continued. So a lot of I encourage people when we're especially discussing things like this to zoom out from the just the actual issue that's happening and to go deeper into the roots of it all. Who is doing it and why? When did this start? And then you will realize that a lot of what we're dealing with today, a lot of the underlying energies that cause for the fake emancipation, fake independence, are stemming from ideas that are thousands of years old and that they continue to this day. And the reason why they're continuing and why they have so much power and such a stronghold is because that part of it is hidden. It looks like it's just this particular incident and that incident and that incident and this, that, and the other. And so the real goal remains hidden. um, this is a subject that I'm very passionate about, and it took me a long time to jump out of why is this happening? This one, when we look at things like classism, racism, and all the isms, to realize that no, it's one puppet master doing all the things. Imagine, right? Imagine that you wanted to enslave 100 people, but it's just three of you that want to enslave 100 people. It would make sense that you create, fund, and encourage all the things that would divide that 100 people into smaller groups of maybe 10, 5, 3, and 2, because then they would be easier to control. This is why I say, the separation politics that we live in today is why a lot of people are um, experiencing hardships, because I'm sure the reason why we're talking about this today is because of what that particular thing has done. Like, we're still dealing with the fallout from it today. But that's what it is. This idea of policing and governance. We need to look into the history of that. We need to look into the history of taxation. I have a very intellectual family, researchers, bankers, all of that. And the pushback that I will get from them when I raise these ideas are just, it's the pushback I get is what they've been taught or what they learned in school, right? But all of these things that we've been taught and that we learned are from, and I hope I'm not going too far from the question that you asked me, like, see if you can follow me here, is that these are all man-made systems that are created, like, for instance, um, a passport or a visa. Think about that. To travel from one country to the next. The idea of nationality, that is another separation. I just feel like it's a big answer to a lot of questions, including this one. The house slave, the field slave, all of that is just a divide and conquer tactic, and it's all over. When you look in systems of society, people that were, my daughter went to Montego Bay High, which at the time was considered the second best, even that, rate in the high school. So all of the people them from that school, yeah, better than the one them in the school were rated 10, all of those things. But she came home with a document that she got from her guidance counselor. It was a booklet, really, and it was about career day. And they had all the different careers listed, and beside it, it had all the subjects that you should possibly take. And the first one, they had doctor. The subjects, and I kid you not, the last column was dollar signs, right? So they had, so say for instance, I don't remember exactly, but scaling it this way, so maybe there were $4 under doctor, and then under there you had lawyer with maybe $3, and then it went down to something like receptionist. And this is indoctrination, propaganda. Like, okay, so this job is more important than this other job, and if you can do this, this makes it. It's the same thing. It's the same thing. It's the same divide and conquer, separation tactics. How about that we all have our roles to play in society, right? And they're all equally important, and it doesn't make a person less than the other. And that what you should thrive to be is your own purpose, the thing that you were born on this earth to do, the thing that makes you feel convicted every day. And how can you be of service rather than how much money can you make and how much better you can be than the other person.
Thanks, Kasani. You know, I am very understanding and sympathetic to the view that much of what the world is enduring in terms of suffering, separation, classism, all of that can be attributed to the greed and corruption of a few people. But I'm concerned that in some of these discussions, we don't give it its proper name, which is white supremacy, global white supremacy. And yes, there are different levels, and there's different hierarchy, and different people suffer on different levels, and there is intersectionality and all of that. But I feel if we don't give it its proper name, this system that has been going on for 5,000 years, because it is older than the transatlantic slave trade. I feel like we rob the victims of their proper due in history, their proper compensation. We rob the descendants of this system, the existing um, Europeans or Caucasians, of an opportunity to reflect, assess the system of white supremacy, change their worldview. It kind of reminds me in many ways of the outer many structure that we're suffering from in Jamaica. Yes, we all suffer, but some of us suffer from different things. And it has a name, and I feel like at different parts of the fight, we have to give the fight a name. And I don't think we can fight for global humanity and peace unless we topple the system of white supremacy, global white supremacy, which manifests itself as capitalism. Your thoughts on that?
I agree wholeheartedly. And I can't believe that the discussion has gone on for so long without mention of white Jesus. Because white Jesus is as important, if not more important, to the enslavement project than even the system of capitalism. Once you accept a God that looks like your oppressor or your quote unquote former oppressor, you are in a perpetual state of oppression, a perpetual state of self negation, and a perpetual state of dependency. And there are most of the Jamaican population, they might tell you otherwise, but most of the Christian Jamaican population is secretly glad for slavery because it brought them into the fold of Jesus Christ of Nazareth, their personal Lord and Savior. And had they been left to the jungles and savannas of Africa, they would rot in eternal hell from never having been exposed to the Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. Once you have people's minds in that kind of stranglehold, freedom is um, difficult to achieve.
So powerful is the effect of Christianity, that even our freedom fighters, many of them, even during the slave rebellions, many of them were preachers. A lot of the history that we have of slaves who were taught to read, they were taught to read the Bible, and they then used that skill and knowledge to spread information about Africa Ethiopia to the other slaves. So even, you know, Christianity is even embedded in the way we fight our oppressors. But going back to runaways, Leighton, and solidarity, I see some parallel with the Maroon slave catchers and this idea that they are going to secure their freedom and their superiority and sovereignty by colluding with or acknowledging, giving credibility and legitimacy to the laws of the planters, with Rastafari's acceptance of the section under the Dangerous Drugs Act, which allows them special privileges when it comes to ganja possession. I am appalled that Rasta, given the history from them time there until now, from the bush people in Jamaica, which evolved into the Ethiopianists, which evolved into the Garveyites, which evolved into Rasta, to now be coming to basically sign treaties with the government so that them can smoke ganja and other poor black Jamaicans don't have the same rights. Is
Keisha,
this the kind of emancipation that we signed up for, Leighton?
Keisha, why you touch a subject that leads me to my core. You know, say them are all planning to import ganja. To import, like Rasta is going to be to facilitate the importation of ganja into Jamaica. My God. But yes, Kishi, I think it's a perfect analogy. I don't think it's a stretch at all. I think the day Rasta joined on to, you have to realize, that these are amendments to the Dangerous Drugs Act, that the day Rasta um, resigned from its position that ganja is the healing of the nation, and there's no, Rasta is not in support of decriminalization, and it's not joining any regime of decriminalization and licensing, that ganja is supposed to be legal and free. Once Rasta leave that position, I don't know, and this is Rasta sacrament, so called, who can take Rasta serious?
It's like the
It's like
Maroon Treaty all over again.
precisely, it's like it's like the chief seller, when one expect that when the battlements are set up, the weaker, less fortified battlements are the ones that when come under the heaviest pressure, maybe those are the ones that the invaders will seize before you can regroup your forces to beat them back. But these people go to the heart of the resistance. Rasta, the bulwark against imperialism and colonialism and white supremacy, the heartbeat of Africanism in the diaspora. You just go straight to Rasta and just co-opt, contaminate, assimilate, just, and now you have the whole field to yourself.
It seems like the fight wasn't for freedom and emancipation. The fight was to be the most rewarded slave.
Yes,
And
and
it is very much reminiscent of the Maroon treachery. We can't get around it.
yes, indeed. And you know, I was listening to a podcast earlier today, Politics Watch, and he was mentioning that the major political party in Jamaica, one of People's National Party, uh, so-called leftist socialist party, uh, at one time it was the Black Man Party, Black Man Time No Party, headed by a white investment banker. He didn't mention Jew, white Jew investment banker, but I'll say it. And you, when you look at every center of radicalism, every center of connection to Garveyism, Rastafarianism, a black working class consciousness and solidarity, when all of those institutions are completely, I don't even know if infiltrated is a an accurate, it's like them totally skin inside out. Then you're left with people that are completely rudderless and nihilistic and self-destructive, which is exactly what we see happening now. So that our emancipation is leading to nothing more than our destruction. There's something else I want to say about this individual off-grid thing, and it's the biggest obstacle, I think, to organization and the building of a real self-determining community in Jamaica. Let us say, for instance, that you could find, you could partner with some rich African nation to build, to solar power, um, all poor black residences in Jamaica. Let us say. Um, you would soon come under serious attack from the powers that be. Now, in each person's mind, it would be good if he could have solar power, you know. And part of that is so that when it get, time of power cut, he can look at the darkness around him and feel special and nice. That's a part of our, house Negro, field Negro mentality. But just imagine, if you will, a situation where in a poor black neighborhood, in a time of power cut, every house is alive because all of them have solar power, and that's multiplied in every postal district, every community across the island. By the time it reached there, so they put out a contract on whoever is solarizing the place, because you're talking about billions of petrojam dollars. So what needs to be appreciated on a fundamental grassroots societal level is that any move you make to freedom en masse will draw forth a high-handed, heavy response from the system of global white supremacy. And that we have to be prepared at some point to fight for real emancipation.
It strikes me that the biggest con game of the apprenticeship that was granted in 1834, the period of apprenticeship, is that the apprenticeship is ongoing because solidified in our mind was the notion that we had to earn our freedom. We had to rely on others to teach us how to be free. We had to learn their ways, master their ways. We had to pay back for some sin of being black, of being African. And we see it all the way from 1834 come right up to modern day. So whether we are mortgaging off our freedom to brown manism, so the Manleys and the Shearers are the Siagas who step in place now of the King of England, of the planters, the mulattoes, the children of the slave master, entrusting them with leading us. Yeah, man, they can plead to the king on our behalf. Yeah, man, they can work things out for us. That is where we failed. When we allow the middle class brown bourgeoisie to give us trinkets in the form of legislative amendments, legislative change, we've never really left apprenticeship. Then we have these buffer races, the Indians, the Chinese, the Syrians, who we have entrusted with the corporate financial building of our country. Black Jamaicans run downtown Kingston. We are the life and the heartbeat, but we don't own those buildings. We live in squalor. We work in sewage. How will we end this period of apprenticeship, Leighton? What is the mental shift that needs to happen?
Okay. In the truth of the matter is that we are at war. We are under siege. Now, what happens to a people that is under siege but does not know it? Because that's the situation that you're in. We are in. We're under siege, but we don't know it. We are trying to accommodate ourselves within a system that has us under siege. We are paying allegiance to a system that has us under siege. We are contributing to and giving authority to a system that has us systematically, continuously under siege. And the only way that that can be halted is for us to first recognize that we are under siege. Now, by the time most of us recognize that we're under siege, we are well beyond our childbearing years. And long story short, what is necessary is mass indoctrination of toddlers to raise a generation of people who understand that they are behind enemy lines and to move accordingly. Firstly, with the establishment of communities that perpetuate that indoctrination amongst the next generation. You see, when you talk about like living off the grid, I think of Pinnacle. And so that's a settlement that was, um, basically people disengaging from the system, forming their own community, a thriving economic community that was smashed, destroyed by the authorities. And so it's all well and good to talk about if one of us goes off the grid, it's one thing, but if a group of us come together and buy hundreds of acres of land and set up a community, factories, schools, etc., our own internal security, our own power supply, our own hospitals. At what point do you think officialdom would send in gunmen, try to destabilize that community? Because once they see that you are self-determining all of authority and neo-colonial, what have you, and the system of apprenticeship, modern day system of apprenticeship, will let you know that you can't. You have no room to determine anything regarding your welfare, your future, beyond what we grant permission for.
And of course, outside of the pinnacle settlement that Leonard Howell formed, we have the clear example of revolutions like what happened in Haiti, and the fact that a black independent nation will simply not be tolerated by the powers of be. In fact, the idea of a black independent nation, how foolish it is not very different than a black person thinking that they can just go and live off the grid in the middle of mass suffering, mass slavery, mass colonialism. In a world of global white supremacy, domination, rising Chinese colonialism, you think you're going to be a lone nation that is independent, where blackness is revered, where the resources of your country are used for the betterment of black people? This is what people don't understand about the concept of global white supremacy. It simply can't happen. You're just as foolish as that biker who think that when he's swimming by the river, Kaiser and these mining companies not going to come and boot you out. That's why the Maroons are currently being booted out. They're being rewarded for their foolishness and the failure to adhere to Garvey's sound advice that no African will be free unless Africa is free. So I want to kind of touch on the issue of infiltration and the hindrance that this has caused to all our attempts to be free and independent. We have to talk about the CIA, we have to talk about the bourgeoisie. And, you know, we underestimate the brutal nature of this system. But it's very clear when you look at concepts like kwashi, which is basically a fool person, somebody who is just, yes, master, yes, sir. That's coming from the plantation. But what people don't know is that Kwashi was a subversive character. He was pretending. He was playing fool to catch wise. See it in stories like Brother Nancy and Brother Tukuma, were the African Jamaicans in response to brutality, knowing that they're being watched, knowing that we're being surveyed constantly, whether it was back in the day BACRA or modern day CIA plans. We have to come up with all kinds of subversive methods to survive. But as you said, Leighton, there is no point in discussing that if people think that we're actually free. How do you get an enslaved person to realize that they're free? That they're not free, rather. How do we convince a person who they grew up in a time where them never have shoes and now they see where they can step out of their housing scheme and they look left is a Starbucks, they look right is a McDonald's, ATMs everywhere, high rise buildings everywhere. How can you convince that person that they're not better off, that they haven't achieved something?
Okay. Boy, you're such a phenomenal moderator. Listen, we come to the issue of leadership. Uh, Leadership is a very delicate thing because a leader must have more vision than the people that he leads, but the leader can't be too far ahead of his people. Uh, the leader must heed the people, but the leader must also bring the people along. So it's a very delicate balancing act. But at some point, the leadership must drive the people, even when they cannot see as far as he can, but because they recognize his leadership or her leadership. So um, there is no way to make an enslaved person realize that they are not free if they are comfortable and desirous and aspiring to the trappings of their unfreedom. And leadership will find it necessary to um, purge uh, the archetypes of those within the community. Leadership will promote and encourage every contrary strain within the community. Leadership will encourage the readership of certain books, the staging of certain plays, the holding of certain public debates that directly challenge every notion of global white supremacy. Using cartoons, using songs like indoctrination, conditioning, like what every society does that wants its people moving in a direction that is beneficial to them. Will that leadership be dictatorial? Unavoidably.
Leadership in Jamaica. That's interesting. Both yourself and Kasani gave examples of the period of the COVID pandemic and how different factions of society responded. Many of the so called radicals of the 70s, who have now evolved into politicians, lawyers, radio spokespersons, media personalities, singers, journalists, these so called radicals of the 70s, who were calling for black power, socialism, anti imperialist system, we see that they have exposed their hand when they got a chance to be on the side of the privileged. We saw prominent lawyers, self proclaimed pro black lawyers, calling for the forced vaccination of gardeners, helpers, regular poor black working class Jamaicans. So, my question is, having described what type of leader or type of leadership is necessary, is it possible that that person or those persons can come from the ranks of the educated, the middle class, the brown man them, the brown woman them, the Jewish bankers that used to wear afro when them young and date black girls?
What a fantastic question, Kisha. Not only can the leadership come from that group, the leadership must come from that group. The leadership must come from those among that group who are prepared to commit class suicide, a concept which Amilcar Cabral deals with in depth. And this is not because the proletariat, the common people, are incapable of leading their own charge. It is simply that it's a matter of time and circumstance. And when people are um, illiterate, um, and bogged down with the problems of finding their next meal, uh, financially precarious existences, it becomes difficult to have a structured plan and program. So you see people like the attorney Castro, the medical doctor Che, um, the lawyer Mandela, um, the teacher Cabral. These people are necessary for leadership roles. And to look at the jobs,
Don't forget our esteemed brother Walter Rodney.
ah, beautiful. I thank you for bringing up Walter up because he presented such a danger that they had to get rid of him expeditiously, and he's only ever spoken of in mainstream circles as a cautionary tale. Nobody even talks about how he was assassinated. If people say, "How did Walter Rodney die?" They don't know if it's from a gunshot wound or whatever. It's just they don't know where, when. They just know that Walter Rodney was a radical man, and you know, the man they, you know, they marked for death, and that's the end of it. So yes, indeed, people like those are necessary. When you to understand the depth of leadership in Jamaica, which I speak, you just have to look at those who have committed class suicide, those who are willing to commit class suicide. Uh, you and I have had conversations, Keisha, about the conscious community. There is no bigger aspirational class to bourgeoisdom and assimilation and shoulder rubbing with white people than the Jamaican quote unquote conscious community. So um, until we have a cadre of leaders of that ilk and background who are prepared to commit class suicide, not posturing because they didn't get to go to Campion. But as soon as they have enough Campion friends, they can pretend like they went. No. People who are committed to class struggle on behalf of the lower classes. People who not just turn them back, but bonfire upon the class that they come from. Until there is that leadership, then the people will continue to perish.
I note with grave concern that all the examples that you gave were not Jamaicans. And I don't have a lot of hope when I look around today and see the people or the institutions that Bob aptly described as graduating thieves and murderers to be capable of leading the people out of this perpetual apprenticeship into true economic freedom and independence. There is much to be admired in Michael Manley, but history teaches that he had a lot to do with I forget the name of the operation. There is an is operation. I'll remember it shortly. But basically, the group of army personnel that came to Jamaica and destroyed the ganja fields. When you read the official documents from those persons who were involved in the operation, they go on to say things like it was unprecedented for a sovereign nation to invite the involvement of a foreign country in the eradication of plants like ganja and all of that. And the same Manly turn around and use the desperation of the people to dominate them, use their ignorance. You remember the rod of correction that he said was given to him by Selassie, manipulating the people who wanted to see a Pan Africanist leader, wanted to see some elements of Ethiopian Africanism
You
in
know,
these people.
Kish, Like you, I think Manley was well intentioned in some ways. Um, as you know, I went to Campion. I was deputy head boy at Campion at one point.
I didn't
And
know that. I didn't know that, Layton.
yes, indeed. So, but I, my children, well, the bright ones are being encouraged at their school to choose for Campion. But my children know that I'm not fond of Campion as an institution. Fine academically, very well organized, and you know, but I see it as a bastion of neo-colonial indoctrination. And why did I start talking about Campion? What were we talking about before?
Manly and the dearth of
He
leadership.
sent his children to Campion. When Campion represented the apex of, privilege, I mean, next to Hillel. And, every government minister send them to the Campion and pure white people picnic and China people picnic go Campion. Somebody who lead the charge for equalization of educational opportunities across the high school spectrum, egalitarianism, uh, anti-colonialism. You can't say anything in them go Campion. When you set up certain school and say these schools can rival Campion, these schools, we are dedicated to putting resources into these schools that black people children will have as much of an opportunity to get instruction in all of the things that these white people picnic getting instructed in, and turn around and send your children. The first estate that Castro nationalized on taking power in Cuba was his family's estate. The first estate Castro nationalized was his family's estate. So, to cut a long story short, Manley was anything but a class traitor. Manley was in that class, very much of the conscious community that want to develop fame and notoriety from their advocacy of black people, but who was quite comfortable with being the darling of the white establishment nonetheless. Sort of like Muta Baruka.
It seems to me that part of the problem is everybody is jostling for the role of the most benevolent master, when we should all be striving to get rid of the role of master. So the white Jew tell you say him rootsy, him can be a good master. The brown man tell you say, yeah man, we love Castro, we can be a socialist master. Then the CIA guy, brother tell you say, him is the kind of master that's going to enrich the country. And the conscious community tell you that they'll be the master who will give you vegan food, beads, and sandals. But no one wants to get rid of massa. No one sees it fit to lead the people to a sense of true freedom. And I suppose that's the only place you and I will depart tonight. is that given our unique history in Jamaica, the poor blacks will have to take this idea of their own leadership, their own freedom, their own emancipation into their own hands, because others who have come before simply can't be trusted. Simply can't. They simply the minute Rasta face start go on magazine, him forget that the core of Rasta was built in the bush people of this country.
Um, you think that's what Garvey wanted for black people to take charge of their own freedom?
Yes, don't you?
Indeed, but it take a leader like Garvey to propel people to that vision because they've been so indoctrinated, especially epigenetically. You know, it's
I
like
suppose then what we would need is a sort of hybrid. Someone who is of the people, educated nonetheless, able to mobilize, educate, centralize, organize, but has no aspirations of fleeing from the people.
this is exactly it, and you know, sounds like a unicorn. Uh, and that's why there is such a premium on great leadership. But somebody who does not want aggrandizement or the trappings of it, and somebody who can keep in check those amongst him that would want to use his position of influence or power to aggrandize themselves, you know, um, because that alone will make him a target amongst his own cadre, you know. So the big man I still don't put all of the money and go on like say, him a monk. I'm on a walk, I'm on a this, I'm on a that, I'm on even this and that. And then you find them dead and then start talk all kind of thing about when you say molest little girl and when you say this and when you say that.
I think we need to study great movements in more depth, because once you have a concept of a leader, you're always going to be prone to corruption and abuse of power. I mean, even Castro has been criticized for living in a mansion and all sorts of things. Human beings are weak in relation to principles and how they treat with power. And so perhaps we need to look further again to the structure of the UNIA. One of the reasons why it was so successful and spread like wildfire is because each arm, each leg of the UNIA, it had its own leadership system. It wasn't just Garvey. Garvey was the head that you could see, but the movement itself was propelled by various different leadership structure. You had the black nurses, you had all kinds of system in place. And I am minded too about what you shared with me about the Kenyans in their recent uprising and their refusal to identify a leader. Is it time, Leighton, for us to stop seeking the Messiah? Stop seeking the leader, the top man, the Don, the big woman.
Boy, boy, Kishi, you asked the best question. So yeah, we were talking the other day about the Kenyan protests, especially student-led protests that caused the government to capitulate. Like within 24 hours, the prime minister switched from saying, or president, whatever, head of state, head of government, switched from saying we're not negotiating with these people at all to saying, okay, we'll come to the table. Choose among yourselves the leaders who will speak on your behalf. Well, firstly, they were invited to the presidential wherever, and the students said no. Can you imagine them invite Rasta to Jamaica House? Rasta dead upon him years. The students said no.
Then you know remember say them we name Bongo Herman and all these long time fighters and Rasta up above Marley Museum, sit down beside Prince Charles and an informer concubine, I play Nyabingi drum, I welcome them. The very representation of the people who have had us under the heels of British colonialism and oppression, beating Nyabingi drum to welcome them. The ancestors were not pleased.
No, not at all. Yeah, yeah, Keith. Real thing. So, sorry, where was I?
The Kenyans who were invited,
Yeah. So they said, no, man. You have to meet with us on our ground. And when he capitulated to that demand and then sent to know, well, him want to know, who am I going to meet with? Who is the delegate? Who is the leader? Who are the leaders? Then send back and say, we're not a leader. You can't target with. You can't bribe with. You can't single we out. We're not a leader. Here is our demands. Where you are, say? My blood ran cold, Kishi. Because see, all of these guys want to be the head nigga in charge. That's the bottom line. They want to be the great black emancipator. They want to be, you know, whatever criticism they make of Castro, Castro make the people them promise that them not gonna name a building after him, not a road after him, Like, why, this need for self-aggrandizement and lionization and picture upon this a billboard and that the highway name after you and that the building name after you. You know how many places, football field, with name after Eddie Siaga? You have Eddie Siaga Library, Eddie Siaga Highway, Eddie Siaga Football Field, Eddie Siaga Hall, Eddie Siaga Building. My
it's
God,
it's 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 psychological enslavement. Never you forget that you're a conquered people.
yeah,
When
man.
you when you
And
go
so,
when you go downtown and you go through some of these garrisons and you see these white people faces paint on the wall, it's like, yo, it's crazy.
yeah, and the other thing we have to do, you see, Keith, in this indoctrination process, we have to we have to remove the heroes, the pantheon of heroes. We have to we have to reorganize it. Just keep Garvey and start fresh. You know,
Agreed.
we
Agreed.
have to we have to come up with a new criteria, new criteria for heroism. People who we have to prioritize African liberation in our definition of heroism. And we have to see heroism in the little man, you know, the man that put the Klansman them on tape and go to the police and say, listen, this is what's happening. Putting him life in jeopardy because he can't suffer what is going on to continue.
I love that.
We look at that we look at that man and our reflexivity say, so I'm getting involved with them. You know, tell you when to do. Those same people are gonna say, yeah, Malcolm had a past, but he reformed. We are riven through with contradiction through self hate and anti blackness. And until we can find somebody larger than life that is black that we can look up to, the way them call Jordan, Black Jesus, and that person can say, you are enough, you're good, you are more than enough. Like what Garvey there tell the people, you know. I'm reminded of something every time I think about it. I get goosebumps. Janelle Bromfield, the track athlete for Jamaica, girlfriend of Noah Lyles, the American low note sprinter. Um, that a lot of Jamaicans have been coming for her, telling her she black and ugly, and she responded and said, "All you Jamaicans coming for me about my color. This black is gold." And you can see how she feels about herself in the way she carries herself. Black, so till she shine. When people like that are put as icons for our people to see, like put as icons, don't even say follow this person, but just put that person front and center, and people like that, so as to cause the change of thinking that Malcolm X spoke about, where we love ourselves, we love our stories, we love our language, we love our customs, we love our fashions, we love our habits, we love our history, we love our origination, we love ourselves, and we don't want nothing to do with Babylon system. That's the goal.
And we must never relent in calling out traitors, um, who signed up for the war and then abdicated once they've gotten enough spoils. Finally, Leighton, age, I believe, is an important factor in revolutionary thought, revolutionary thinking. Not all, but we see enough evidence that the closer people get away from their youth, is the more watered down their principles seem to get, and the more open they are to compromise. And this is not alarming. In everybody's race, the most revolutionary are the youth. You know, a lot of people would say that Mandela bow in him old age, although Winnie never bow still, but that's for another podcast. Um, A lot of our leaders, a lot of our Pan Africanists, the older they got, the more weary they get in the fight, the more accomplished they get and awarded by Babylon, their position get watered down. So, in your final thoughts, Leighton, I would like you to address any young person that's listening who is looking around their community, looking around the world, studying history, studying themselves, and feel that fire in the pit of their belly, but feel helpless because the elders them are waste, the conscious Jamaicans them are waste, the Rasta them kind of shaky, the uptown people them shaky, the intellectual them sound like educated fools. What would you say to these young, fiery people that want a way, want to find a way where there's no way?
But tell them that the journey of 1,000 miles begins with the first step. I would tell them that their first step is to educate themselves fully. And by fully, I mean as fully as they can about uh, well, give them revolutionary literature to read and discuss approaches like uh, groundings, Walter Rodney, um, mass organization of rural populations, Cabral, um, and more than anything to teach them how to. You never get it 100% right, but to teach them how to recruit without danger to themselves, so that you have systems of recruitment where nobody is recruited at an upper level, everybody is recruited at a lower level. And once at the lower level, they move through the levels, and there are checks and balances at each level. You know, get them involved in creating systems rather than, you know, raging against the system with a clenched fist by themselves. So until they can develop that network to be able to be at least educated and moving towards self-sufficiency, home garden, independent power supply, um, read about guerrilla warfare, urban warfare, revolutionary principles. Be careful about what you search on the internet. Understand that you're behind enemy lines.
Thank you for that, Leighton. And on that note, we will end tonight's discussion. Thank you for all who joined, all our listeners. And until next time, this was another edition of the Truth Gangsters podcast. Have a great evening.